Welcome back, and now for the news in detail. We start from Afghanistan, where nearly 100 Taliban fighters and Afghan army soldiers have been killed in the last 24 hours. Both sides claim to have caused heavy damage during fighting in 18 of the country's provinces. Taliban spokesperson Zabiullah Mujahid says fighters mounted 45 attacks, wounding 39 Afghan security officials. The Afghan army says their forces carried 25 operations and 13 airstrikes against the Taliban. The army says 6 other Taliban fighters have been wounded in the attacks. Meanwhile, the Afghan government has finalized its list of delegates for a meeting with the Taliban in China to discuss the intra-Afghan peace process. On Monday, Afghan President Ashraf Ghani agreed to meet the Taliban in Beijing after talking with the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi. Ghani's spokesperson Siddiqui said this meeting could make a way for a broader dialogue between the two sides. Siddiqui said the Afghan government will soon share its list of delegates with the Chinese government. The spokesperson said the meeting's date will be announced by Beijing soon. Meanwhile, the Taliban have yet to make any comment on peace talks with the Afghan government in China. The U.S. House of Representatives Intelligence Committee will open public hearings in its impeachment inquiry into President Donald Trump next week. The House is investigating whether Trump abused the powers of his office by pressurizing Ukraine for personal political gain.
The top U.S. diplomat in Ukraine, William Taylor, and Deputy Assistant Secretary of State George Kent will testify on November 13, while former U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine, Marie Yovanovitch, will appear on November 15.
Those open hearings will be an opportunity for the American people to evaluate the witnesses for themselves, to make their own determinations about the credibility of the witnesses, but also to learn firsthand about the facts of the president's misconduct.
If the House votes to approve the articles of impeachment, the Republican-controlled Senate would then hold a trial on whether to remove Trump from office.
U.S. President Donald Trump and his Turkish counterpart Tayyip Erdogan will meet in Washington on November the 13th. The two leaders decided to meet after discussing the latest situation in northeastern Syria on the phone. Trump said Erdogan told him Turkey has captured ISIS terrorists, including the wife and sister of al-Baghdadi. The U.S. president said, among other topics, they discussed ending hostilities with the Kurds. Meanwhile, Erdogan said both the leaders spoke of bilateral trade goals and the fight against terrorism. The meeting comes amid strong pressure by the U.S. Republican and Democratic senators on Trump to levy more sanctions on Ankara. Israel says it is assisting Syrian Kurds who are affected by Turkish military operations. Deputy Foreign Minister Zipi Hotwelli says Tel Aviv sees them as a counterweight to Iranian influence and is advocating for them in talks with the U.S. Turkey launched its operation against Kurdish fighters after the U.S. withdrew troops from northern Syria in early October. Israel's Deputy Foreign Minister told Parliament the offer to assist Syrian Kurds had been taken up. Syrian Kurdish officials could not immediately be reached for the comment.
Israel indeed has a salient interest in preserving the strength of the Kurds and the additional minorities in the North Syria area as moderate and pro-Western elements who proved their utility many times over the years, especially during the fighting against ISIS.
Israel has maintained discreet military intelligence and business ties with the Kurds since the 1960s. Now, moving on, at least 3 people were killed and 15 others were wounded when Iraq security forces used live fire to disperse protesters gathered on a bridge in central Baghdad. Baghdad has been hit by the biggest wave of anti-government demonstrations in decades.
Thousands are taking part in anti-government demonstrations in the capital and southern provinces. Protesters blocked Ahrar, Shuhada, and Bab al-Muaddam bridges to bring the country to a standstill. They also blocked the entrance to the Nasiriyah oil refinery in southern Iraq, prompting a fuel shortage. A government official says the oil refinery blockade has cost the country over $6 billion. Meanwhile, the U.S. has condemned the killing and kidnapping of unarmed demonstrators.
Pyongyang has banned Japan's Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's entry into North Korea. In a statement, North Korea's envoy to Japan, Song Il-ho, bashed Abe for criticizing Pyongyang's missile tests. Song said Abe is making a fuss as if a nuclear warhead has fallen on Japanese soil. He said Pyongyang is taking legitimate self-defense measures and no one should make ill-advised remarks about it. Abe condemned North Korea's missile test at ASEAN summit this week, calling them a violation of UN sanctions. Japan's Prime Minister also expressed his intention to visit Pyongyang to sort issues in a one-on-one meeting with leader Kim Jong-un. Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan has asked the global community to play its role in immediate lifting of siege in Indian-occupied Kashmir. PM Khan made this a call in a meeting with the President of Council of States of Swiss Confederation, Jean-René Fournier, in Islamabad. In a meeting, PM Khan told René about the worsening humanitarian crisis in the valley and its grave impact on regional security. The Pakistani Prime Minister said India's illegal actions are in violation of international law and United Nations Security Council resolutions and are also jeopardizing regional peace. René has earlier condemned blatant human rights violations in occupied Kashmir, calling for peaceful resolution of the issue. New Delhi's curfew and communications blackout in occupied valley has now entered 95th day. The New York Times has once again highlighted the plight of women in Indian-occupied Kashmir under curfew. The leading U.S. newspaper published a report sharing the misery of women journalists, mothers, daughters and sisters in the besieged valley. It said female journalist was harassed by Indian forces as they threatened to assault and torture her for covering protests. Journalist Masarrat Zahra refused to stay silent, saying she is one of the few voices coming out of the valley otherwise gagged by India. The report says Indian occupying forces kidnap females and shift them to unknown jails with their families fearing the worst. The report said women can't leave their homes because of the fear of being abducted and harassed by the Indian soldiers. Nepal has objected to a new map released by New Delhi showing the disputed area of Kalapani as Indian territory. In a statement, Nepal's foreign ministry said the area clearly belongs to Nepal.
It said the government will not accept any unilateral decisions. The foreign ministry says border-related issues should be resolved through diplomatic channels. India released the new map following its decision to split the state of occupied Jammu and Kashmir into two administrative territories. On the map, India's border cuts into Kalapani, which has been a source of contention between the two countries. The conflict persists as Indian troops have been deployed in the area for more than 50 years. Pakistan and China also raised objections over India's new political map.
In the United States, Muslim Democrats Ghazala Hashmi and Abrar Umesh have made history in Virginia's elections. In a surprise victory, Hashmi unseated incumbent Republican Glenn Sturtevant in the state Senate. Meanwhile, Umesh became the youngest woman to hold elected office in Virginia's history. Umesh is also the first Muslim woman to be elected in the state. Tweeting after her victory, Hashmi said the results show that status quo is no longer accepted. Two Muslim male Democrats, Ibrahim Samira and Sam Rasool, already serve in Virginia's General Assembly. The election has been described as a possible watershed moment for the once conservative southern state. Thirteen people have died in a road accident in Pakistan's southern Sindh province. The police say 5 others were injured in the accident. They say a passenger bus collided head-on with a rickshaw on the national highway in the Matiari district. Officials say one carriageway of the national highway has been closed after the accident. They say the bus passengers were traveling from Nawab Shah to Karachi. 37 people have been killed and 60 wounded in an attack on a Canadian mining company convoy in eastern Burkina Faso. The convoy was ambushed 40 kilometers from the company's Bongo mine. The company, Semafo, says the convoy's military escort vehicle was struck by an explosive device before gunmen opened fire. The gold mining business beefed up security last year when two of its mines in the country came under attack. The West African state has been racked by an insurgency that has killed hundreds of people in recent years. At the same time, the military has struggled to contain violence spilling over the border from neighboring Mali. It's time for a short break, but coming up next in the Bulletin. 14,000-year-old mammoth trap found in Tultepak. An 80-year-old Jacinto Bonilla lifts up to 115 pounds in gym. Welcome back. Studying climate change and sustainability will be compulsory for Italian school students from next year. Education Minister Lorenzo Fioramonti says Rome wants to lead the way in environmental education. Fioramonti said all public schools will include over 30 hours a year in their curricula to study climate-linked issues. The ministry also announced a panel of scientific experts to help it revamp the national curriculum. Fioramonti belongs to the Five-Star Movement, which has a history of environmental concern and grassroots activism. Right-wing opposition parties have criticized him for his stance on climate change and taxation on plastic. Global warming and climate change are devastating planet Earth's ecosystems. In the meantime, scientists warn the world is facing a climate emergency. To combat the challenge, New Zealand is launching a satellite to monitor climate emissions. More in this report.
Climate change has become the leading global challenge for the world today. According to scientists, governments are failing to address the crisis. The crisis is threatening ecosystems worldwide. To help tackle the worsening situation, a methane measuring satellite mission will be based in New Zealand, called MethaneSat. The project is designed to detect global methane emissions, and the data it collects will be used to help combat climate change.
And I'm so pleased to be able to announce a strategic investment that will see the New Zealand government take part in its first official space mission. New Zealand has joined a global science mission that will launch a state-of-the-art science satellite called MethaneSat into space.
The Mission Control Center for the satellite is scheduled to launch in 2022.
A key feature of the agreement is that the Mission Control Centre will be located in New Zealand. And New Zealand researchers and scientists will have the opportunity to be involved in cutting-edge science at every stage of this mission.
New Zealand will invest $16.57 million in the project.
The world's first mammoth trap set by humans has been found in Mexico. Archaeologists say they found the largest mammoth remains in Tultepak. Mexico's Institute of Anthropology says the human-built pits used 14,000 years ago are evidence that the animals had been hunted. They say the traps contained a cache of 800 bones from at least 14 individual mammoths. Researchers say the pits were found during excavations on land where the government intends to build an airport. In New York City's South Brooklyn, an 80-year-old man spends his nights lifting heavy weights in a gym, hoping to compete at the CrossFit Games one day. This report has the details.
This man may have been born 80 years ago, but he works out with the energy of a teenager. Octogenarian Jacinto Bonilla called the grandfather of CrossFit in his town. He jumps the tall boxes, lifts heavy weights, and practices CrossFit in a Brooklyn gym every day.
I feel good. It gets me strong. I still feel strong. And I love competition. I love competition because competition makes you go to the gym.
Vanilla joined the gym only 10 years ago, but he has been exercising since childhood. He wants to win the title of fittest man by competing with the strongest athletes from around the world.
Before I come to the gym, I meditate on what I'm going to do. And I meditate on to visualize my technique and form. And I try to stay as close to technique and form as I go along.
In the gym, his trainers say he has already become an example for the rest of the community. And if you ask him about his secret, he says, rest and eat well. Bonilla says the most important thing to remember is to keep going.
Thank you.
The first Chinese freight train from Xian to Europe has reached Turkey after crossing Istanbul's undersea Bosphorus rail tunnel. The train arrived in Ankara, where Turkish and Chinese officials were there to welcome it. Turkey's Transport Minister Mehmet Shahid Torhan called it a historic moment and a new era in railway transport. He praised China's Belt and Road Initiative project using the railway to link Europe, China, Asia and the Middle East. He said the line has reduced the journey time between China and Turkey from a month to 12 days. The Bank of England is widely expected to announce today that it is leaving its policy lending rate unchanged. Most economists expect the British Central Bank not change its key interest rate until after next month's UK general election. The majority of economists believe the bank will cut its 0.75 policy rate early next year once the Brexit situation becomes clearer. That's despite market pressures exerted by recent interest rate cuts by the US, European and Japanese central banks. Stock markets across Europe are trading higher after China and the US agreed to cancel additional tariffs. Investors have also been encouraged by corporate earnings for the third quarter. Frankfurt's DAX has gained over 0.5% after Siemens reported an 8% year-on-year increase in revenue. Leading lender Commerzbank also announced a 35% increase in net profits. London's FTSE 100 index is trading marginally higher ahead of a Bank of England interest rate announcement. The British Central Bank is widely expected to keep rates unchanged ahead of next month's general election. In Asia, the Shanghai Composite closed flat, while Tokyo's Nikkei 225 index gained a fraction. Now the weather situation from around the globe. And that's all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news.